This week, we welcome Lamont Orange, Chief Information Security Officer at Cyera, to discuss why organizations must adapt to safeguard data in evolving environments. In the Leadership and Communications segment, the cybersecurity industry loses a visionary. CISO priorities for 2025, budget wisely. How do I position myself to influence senior leadership and more? Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. IT professionals, mark your calendars. Zero Trust World 2025 is happening in Orlando, Florida, February 19th to 21st. This event is tailored for IT leaders and cybersecurity experts who want actionable insights on zero trust strategies, practical solutions for modern threats, and meaningful connections with industry peers. Plus, take advantage of on-hand cyber hero boot camps, expert-led sessions, and the chance to earn CPE credits and your cyber hero certificate. Save $200 on your in-person registration using discount code ZTWSW25 at securityweekly.com/ZTW2025. Reserve your spot now. ThreatLocker implements a least privileged approach to cybersecurity, blocking every executable unless specifically authorized by your team. This methodology mitigates ransomware, supply chain attacks, and zero-day exploits, and ensures 24/7, 365 protection for your organization. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can help prevent known and unknown threats in your digital environment, safeguard your data and operations from threat actors, and align your organization with respected compliance frameworks, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 377, recorded January 6, 2025. Happy New Year, everyone. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for this interview segment are my co-hosts. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque. We had a lot of football, buddy. We got to catch up on.
Lots of football to catch up on. But hey, listen, we're at that final stage of college football, right? We got the college football playoffs going on. Notre Dame, Penn State, Ohio State favored, and Texas, right? I think it's Texas that's left. So It's going to be some interesting college football coming up, and it's wild card time for playoffs, for NFL playoffs. And I don't know if you saw, but Patriots actually won a game, which we probably shouldn't have, because that would have given us a higher draft pick. And then within about an hour and a half, maybe 90 minutes to 2 hours, Gerard Mayo got fired by Robert Kraft. So see you later, coach.
Yep. Well, you get the second draft. The Browns get the third draft. Anyways,
it's great. This may have bumped us to 4, to be honest with you, but we'll see.
Might have. Also joining, who is not a football fan, by the way, Mr. Ben Carr. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, man, how's it going? Yeah, not so much into the football, but happy to be back here after the new year. A little cold weather down here in Texas. Yeah, dipping down into the high teens, low 20s. So, yeah, spicy.
Yeah. There is snow in the forecast for Thursday in northern Texas.
Wow.
Yeah.
You guys have my weather.
Yep.
In my weather. Yeah.
Party blast.
We're going to send it to
you. Yes, that is our guest.
I put on pants today. No more shorts.
Right. Well, Lamont Orange is the Chief Information Security Officer at Cyera. Lamont has over 25 years of experience and has served as an advisor and board member for various organizations. In addition to his role at Cyera, Lamont is an adjunct professor at Washington University in St. Louis, where he works in the Cybersecurity Master Program. Prior to joining Cyera, Lamont served as the Chief Information Security Officer at Netscope. Lamont, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Yeah, you can keep your weather up in St. Louis, though, because I don't want it this cold down here. I'm just saying.
I got 10 inches of snow for you. It's on the way.
All right. Well, we're not going to talk snow. We're going to talk one of my 3 favorite topics. As most people on this podcast know, I'm an app user data guy. We're going to talk data today, Lamont, and some of the things organizations need to do to safeguard data. Before we get into what they should be doing to safeguard data, let's talk about some of the challenges. Why do we have to focus on data security? What's driving the market right now?
I think there's always been a focus on data security. We've just not had the right tooling in order to do it. We may not have had the right resourcing as well to do it. We had to juggle, right? Do I put more people into my data program, or do I go get endpoint security, or do I go get identity? It's which dollar is gonna run and be the most efficient dollar for us. And I think today we've really come to coin that data is the oil. We've always known it. We now have to focus on it due to the explosive nature of data and how, once you hit your first exabyte, you have 3. It just moves that fast at that point. And it's costing us a lot of money also. And not knowing what we have, it makes it terribly difficult to secure.
Yeah, the line you just used, data is the oil. It reminds me of the commercial with McConaughey on, data is the new oil or whatever he says. But you're right. It's not only driving our business analytics, it's the foundation for what's coming from an artificial intelligence perspective, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. When you look at a business is always trying to one up itself, reinvent itself, right? And innovation is part of that. And that innovation is tied to revenue. So when you get to that point of saying, hey, I want to make more revenue, the business is asking, can I use the data? And we don't have the option as security and technology professionals to say no. We've been saying yes, but for many, many years. And that but around what I can use has gotten smaller and smaller, and the business is now demanding to use more of it. So I think that's the other thing that's catapulting us into focusing on data security.
Yeah, and Lamont, you hit on it earlier, right? One of the things that we haven't been really good at is building efficiencies around securing our data, right? You have security leaders just sit back and say, can I go invest some dollars and get a tool? Can I go invest some dollars and get some type of technology? Or do I do the really hard thing? We talk about this on the show all the time. Say easy, do hard. It's hard to identify where all of your data is. It's hard to take that data, then classify it. It's hard to take that classified data now and figure out how to protect it, build workflows around it, build alerting around it, right? That's the hard stuff that folks need to do. And so many times over time, we've decided, let's not do the hard thing. Let's see if we have the easy button tool to fix this.
100%. It's like the Jack in the Box mentality. We figured at some point it has to pop out, and we'll have all the security when it pops out. And that hasn't proven to be, generally how that works for us.
It's true. And we've known these challenges for a long time. And I think to Jason's point, it's hard, so we kind of avoid it, but we can't avoid it anymore. The artificial intelligence use cases of leveraging this data open up a whole new set of security challenges that organizations are trying to figure out. We can't kick this can down the road anymore. So I guess this next kind of question is, how do we start to tackle the data security challenge? Like Jason laid out some of the pieces, but are there better ways, easier ways, more holistic ways to do the hard part?
So I think the easy button is getting there at this point. We're getting to that part. We always knew that inventorying the data was one of the foundational components of knowing what you have. But again, going to some of those structured, whether those resources are structured data or whether they're semi-structured or whether they're unstructured where we started, we thought that was the most easiest part of this whole inventory process. And we found that tends to be difficult as well, because we lack the context of what this unstructured data is. And, in my prior life, taking it to the business and say, hey, it looks pretty interesting to me. What about to you? And they say, go away. We don't want to do that. We're doing enough with security and BCP. You figure it out at that point, right? And when we figure it out, 9 times out of 10, we bet wrong. So we go back to, we know that employee data, customer data, PII, we know those data, credit card types, we know that. And that's where most of our data programs have just stalled. And when we try to get
the challenge, isn't it?
Resource.
That's the challenge, Lamont. Is like, we're forced. Look, ultimately, we want to work with the business, right? I mean, I think a lot of times it feels like we're forced to work with the business because the challenge is the business doesn't want to work with us, right? And so how do we do that better around the data? Because they're ultimately the owners or the custodians of the data, and they understand that. I think you're pointing at the big challenge is when we try to go do it, we're wrong 90% of the time because we don't understand why they have the data or what they're doing with it in the first place, right? And so they're the best people to understand that, but the challenge is getting that bi-directional working, that communication. Everybody talks about everybody's job is sales, but everybody's job really is security. And if they don't participate, it makes our job near impossible.
I think you hit on something too, with communication. I think the business does want to work with us, but I think we communicate very differently. It's a Mars and Venus kind of thing. So I think when you really start to put it in the context of this is how you're using it and be able to actually give them the information around the context, they'll say, yeah, I can look at that. Now you're speaking my language versus you have all of this financial data sitting over here. Is this important or not? I'm going to MFA you to death to make sure you get to it because I don't know how important it
is. And non-phishing resistant MFA, Lamont, as well, which means I'm just continually getting smishing attacks all the time.
So that's a machine learning algorithm, right?
All right. So let's talk about that piece, right? Because what you and Ben are talking about is this very interesting bridge. How do we inventory data with enough information to go to the business to validate its context, right? And it's important so we can classify it correctly. Like, how can we solve just that simple piece, right? Because I think that's an important part. If the business has a very easy way to say, yep, this is this data, this is what it's doing, and you can have that conversation, now both the business and the security leaders are in a better position to now figure out how best to protect that data. But that's the gap still, right?
Yeah. I think that's a lot of the gap. I think we as security and technology programs, I think we've done a lot of hard work with identity and at least trying to get a grapple and understanding of that. And the philosophy, I think, of many was if I know the identity, I know where all the data is. Well, there's still somewhat of the data that has no ownership or data that had ownership at one point, but that resource, that machine has been decommissioned and the data is still sitting there. So what my suggestion is generally is let's turn it on its side. Let's find out where the data is by inventorying it. Then take the attributes. The attributes are the resource. It's the user. It's the application that it was from. And then understand that gives you more context. And that lets you know, yes, I can marry all of these together to say that, yep, it's Lamont's data. It's on his machine. And it also came from an application that we didn't want him to extract it from. But it happened anyway. So now you get that story of, smoke, smoke, smoke to fire. And that gives you the building blocks to build a data program.
And Lamont, don't forget that, a lot of the easy button to problem solving in the legacy IT strategy was, oh, there's access issues. Let's just open it up to the entire business unit.
That's the easy button. That's the other easy button.
Right. So Jason, you hit on something I wanted to dive deeper into because you guys are talking about, the inventory of the data and understanding the data you have. And I think that's super important. And Lamont, you talked about, IAM and access, right? And I think one of the key problems is we collect a ton more data than we need in the hopes that someone will find it useful and be able to generate some query or answer that we didn't assume ahead of time, right? But that gets us a lot of data that potentially could be problematic or we don't want. So how do you try to tackle that onion of like, how do you know who needs access to it, why they need access to it, like how much data you collect, like what data don't I collect, like how should I get to the least amount of data, right? Because the business always wants, the question is, should I collect this? It's collect it. Well, why? Yeah. I don't know, but it may be useful in the future.
I mean, that's the security paradigm too. We collect it because we might need it at some point when we need it. And I think when you start to really look at it, so if you have an understanding of data first, I'll say data first philosophy, you start to get that visibility to show how it's being used. And when you start to marry that attribute of access to it, if it's available the entire .com or the entire .io, and we know that this data type shouldn't be, well, that's a problem. you can always ask for forgiveness because everybody signs an acceptable use policy. Nobody knows what the acceptable use policy is after they sign it. So you can always enforce that because that's what you said and that's what we signed. So when you look at going further into this, the business wants to use more into collecting this piece of data. Well, let's see if we have it someplace else too. Duplicity. Everybody wants their own data, their own kingdom. And if we can help the business have a better strategy by this level of visibility that we have to say this data's here, and now we can give everybody that needs access to it or that's been using it at least access to it over here and delete it over in these other repositories. We actually do some goodwill and save the business some money too.
True. I mean, you talked a little bit when we were preparing for this data restart concept, like use it or delete it. Can we get there? Because to Ben's point, right? The business says collect everything because I don't know if I need it, but I might need it in the future. Well, if you're not using it, you shouldn't be collecting it. But can we ever get to that point?
I'm the eternal optimist. I think we can get a heck of a lot further than we are today. How about that?
At the end of the day, at the end of the day, guys, the business, the CEO, they're building the strategy and we're influencing the strategy, right? And we have to be in a position where we can say, we're going to do it to the best of our ability, but we're never going to be perfect because the business is going to dictate how much we collect, save, and retain. So we need to be building strategies that say, this may not be data that we're going to use for the next 5 years. How do we secure it and protect it? So that when the CEO says, hey, I need that information from 5 years ago so I can go do some data modeling with it, we can go extract it and put it to where it needs to be, right? We need to have provisions for data that is going to be hanging around because it's always going to be there. We're never going to get rid of it all.
100%. I know I do agree with you on that. I think the other thing you hit on, Jason, is another hard point. Just because we delete active data, we never get to archive or backed up data and be able to remediate that. So I think when you start looking at the modern tooling and the capabilities that are available today, we actually get to that piece too. And now we're informing the entire, should I say it, the identity life, or I should say the data lifecycle models that we have all talked about. And eventually, we can get to deletion, but at least if we can get to identification and knowing what we have and a non-human idea of classification, we're batting 1,000. I've been in industries, for example, it's comical of sort, but we always need it, right? The data that we always need, even if it's an email. You're supposed to keep customer data for 7 years in one of these industries. I'm keeping email for 7 years because I just might need it. It has nothing to do with customer data. And I can always pull down that tagging and say 7. And nobody's the wiser. Nobody checks it. It's just there. So if we can get away from that too, and understanding what the data is and actually putting a true classifier and classification on it, batting 1,000 at that point.
So let's assume we nail the inventory, we nail the classification, we're getting closer to capabilities that give us there. We still have this next leap, right? Of, okay, that's the known data, but then we start to generate data off of that data in these new AI models. Because this is where the interesting part of this conversation starts to go next is, now do I do from an AI and a governance and a security perspective? Because I'm using this data to generate more data. How do you stay ahead of it so that you know how to protect all this new data that you're going to create, right? Because that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. I think you hit on it when you talk about governance. Governance is really part of understanding your data in storage, your data in motion, and then you get to the lineage word that you hear us throwing around or we're throwing around in industry now. How do we connect a piece of data or a component of data that was not confidential or not important, and now it's married to something that makes it important? And you have to have continuous monitoring. You have to have something that's serving as your data detection engine, much like we did with threat intelligence and how we look at all the different data that's going in and out of our SaaS apps. We have to, all the access, we have to apply these same concepts to data movement and also have the same threat intelligence and indicators on those to know if it's being used inappropriately or if the attribute of identity has been expanded. We still have to have that same monitoring concept.
So how does that, then Lamont,
Jason.
how does that differ from traditional DLP, right? Because DLP back in the day was going to save the day. That was going to be our visibility. That was going to be our monitoring. That was going to be some of our automation. I don't know. I don't think we've done a great job with DLP.
No,
Some
not
are
with
arguing
iteration
DLP's
1, 2, or
dead,
3.
right?
No.
So how does the modern technologies that we have today differ from what the traditional DLP brought to the table, which I will say wasn't a ton.
So if I had to go back to the hard comment, DLP was the greatest thing when it was introduced because it gave us a little bit of that visibility. And, we had smaller data sets too that we could comb through, and we say unequivocally this was a credit card number. Then we got smart, right? The hackers started doing different things, the bad actors, and hey, that looks like a credit card number. Oh, an employee number looks like a credit card number. And we get all these false positives. And your data team of 3 or 2 for the entire company said, you're killing me. We can't do this. We can't service all of these false positives. So let's quiet this thing down a little bit and not alert on stuff because we don't have the context. So when you're looking at these modern technologies and the modern technologies of the day, we get you the context and say, hey, that is not a credit card number. It looks like an employee number because it doesn't have these attributes of what a real number looks like. And oh, by the way, this picture that I just took, that looks like an M&A strategy versus a JPEG that we can OCR and say it's a JPEG. It looks like it's some kind of document that I shouldn't because it has confidential clearly on it and has my name watermarked on it. I took a picture of it and DLP will still tell you it's an image. Where the new technologies will not. It'll tell you that this looks like it's a confidential document. Why? I can read the watermark.
Context is key.
Yes.
Yes,
And,
that's
and I assume at some point, so I want to go back to the AI governance a little bit because I have to label models with data and kind of marry them at some point, right? Like sensitive data can go to sensitive models, but non-sensitive data can't go to, like, there has to be some like enforcement. Everything I've seen on the governance side so far has been, okay, looking at the models, do they produce valid outputs? But to me, governance is more than that. It's like only this type of data is allowed to be in these types of models, and they produce this type of data, and they can't ever mix. Like, I don't think we're ready quite there technologically, are we? But that's where we have to go, I think, right? We have to align the classification of the AI models with the data so that we don't mix them, I think, right?
Yeah, I think there's 2 answers to it. One is that DLP definitely cannot do that. That's one answer.
Right.
The answer number 2 is toxic combinations is what this is generally called, right? And some of this comes from knowing how your business and how you're using the data so that you can understand what the toxic combination is. And then you go on that monitoring side with data detection that understands what toxic combination did I create that I didn't know. And I feed that back into my data governance, essentially my data protection platform. Something we've really gotten really conditioned on platform, just like we got conditioned on every Tuesday. We need to do a reboot, right? So platforms are good, but sometimes they generate so many signals. We need something that's going to understand what the signal to noise ratio would be. And that's where you get this is what I know is a toxic combination. And this is what I know I created as one.
Right. Yeah, and tracking that and maintaining that and understanding that and identifying if I accidentally create a toxic combination that I didn't intend to. Like these are going to be the challenges around AI and how we protect this data moving forward, I think.
Yeah. And I'll say, nothing's perfect, right? But when you talk about if you give it today and how we're chasing all of the data challenges in these companies that we have, we're 20%. If we get 80%, man, that's a great leap, right? That is a significant and very visible leap in the organization. And the other 20%, we may be able to get there through process, or we may be able to get there through fine tuning models. But we are in an opportunity where we can make a significant leap to increase our data protection.
Hallelujah.
I think it's interesting you bring that up, Lamont, because I think a lot of people in security always look for the 100%, right? They don't look for the fact that, look, we're only at 10 or 20. If we get to 60 or 80, like that's a huge margin shift improvement. And there's a lot of value for us and for the business. We would typically, I see a lot of security professionals who would sit in that meeting where they're talking about that and go, yeah, there's still 20% that it's going to get through. So we're not going to look at that. Right. And I think we need to start shifting our vision of how we address those tasks that aren't solvable at 100%.
Absolutely. I think it's more of still, slow and steady wins the race. You can't get there all in one time in one big leap. And then as you continue to move to that leap, and I'm not making it a trivial exercise either. To jump from 20 to 80, that's tough in itself. Yeah. There's process, there's resource, there's re-education, there's all of these different things that has to occur. But by the time you get that implemented, hey, that 80% could turn to 90 because of some technological advance or something that you learn about your business. And then there's that 10% that hangs out there anyway, no matter what. You have an incorrigible user. If we go back to phishing, that always clicks on everything. You're never going to train them not to. You just put, belts and suspenders around them and make sure that they can't get out the padded box anymore. It's fine.
There's always a Jason somewhere, Lamont. Like, you have to account for that.
But Ben, what you brought up is a risk management conversation also, because to get from 80 to 100% may not be.
What's the cost?
What's the cost to do that? Is it worth the investment to reduce that amount of risk, right? So that's the other part of this that we have to think about. Like if I can get to 20 to 80% with not a huge investment and I can reduce my risk profile by like 4x, right? That might be enough for most organizations because that last 20% maybe costs way too much and doesn't mitigate enough risk to make it worthwhile. But that's why I think getting to a 60 to 80% solution could be enough for most organizations, at least from a cost perspective.
Could be. And you make a great point. You know what it takes, whether that's resourcing, whether that's more tooling, whether that's, whatever it is for you to get to that level. If it's worth, $10 million for you to do it versus investing that 10 into something else that gets those other tools and solutions up to 80%, then you can make the time cost value of money in the solution. You can make the determination based on that versus what we do is make the emotional decision sometimes because it hurts today.
Yep.
Yeah. And Matt, to your point, it's a conversation around risk management, but it's education as well. Mm-hmm. So key point, key example. Clients come to us every day saying, hey, we want to turn on this new thing called Copilot. Okay, so how's your data posture? How's your data security posture these days? Well, we haven't really done a whole lot. All right, so let's fire up Copilot because you've already turned it on in your tenant. I want you to do a search right now at Copilot. Show me everything my HR director has worked on today. And you have sensitive files that get brought up if you don't have your data security posture in hand. If you're not identifying your data, if you're not classifying your data, if you're not putting conditional access around those data sets, that's what's going to happen. You're going to have an intern who gets Copilot, puts in a prompt and asks about some sensitive information. And guess what they're going to get? Every file.
Every file. Hands down.
So it's education as well, because it's very influential to sit in front of a CFO or a CEO and say, let me show you a prompt here that every user has access to right now because you decided to turn this thing on in your tenant.
And you make a great point. Even if we're confident that, we say you go through the 5 out of 10 dentists example, right? If 5 out of 10 security professionals say that they don't have a data problem, great. Let's do a risk assessment and find out if you do or not, to your point. And that tells you if you have a problem.
100%.
Yeah. Show them the data. Lamont, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thank you. It was great. And I look forward to maybe doing this again sometime.
Yes, sir. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.